Hi, everyone. I'm Eevis, and today I will be talking about cool new things in Apollo Client version 3. A few words about Apollo Client for those of you who might not know what it is. It's a GraphQL client library, or that's how I would describe it. Actually, if you look at the Apollo Client's documentation, I think there it says that it's a state management library, and that was a new thing for me when I read this when I was preparing for this presentation. But it's part of Apollo, so the Apollo Data Graph platform. So basically the company Apollo, which has paid things such as Apollo Studio. I have no idea about that because I've never used it. But also they have also these open source libraries such as, well, Apollo Client, but also Apollo Server and tools. And Apollo Client, it can be used with React, but it can also be used without React. And there are implementations with, I think, I'm not sure with front-end libraries, but like it can be used with something else than React too. And note about examples I'm showing in my talk, they will be with React, basically. So yeah, Apollo Client's version 3.0 was released in July this year, and there has been, I think, like the current version is 3.2 point something. I'm not sure what's the patch version of the current release, but there has been changes or new versions after that. And I realized after writing the description of the talk that I'm actually talking about things that are like some of these things have come out in these minor versions. So I think not every piece of these things that I'm talking about where it came out with the 3.0 version. So that's why I'm actually talking about the Apollo Client version 3, not 3.0. These things that I will be talking about are some new features. Some of them are completely new and some of them are a bit refactored. So there are in earlier versions, there are some things that can be compared with them, or they are just, they've been refactored under the hood. So that's why I could say that they are new things. And these things that I will be discussing about are reactive variables, field policies, and then how pagination is implemented in Apollo Client. And before diving into the actual features, a few words about the example app that I'm using the code samples from. Well, first of all, that app doesn't actually exist, so I haven't coded that. So I'm sorry, I can't point you to the direction of a repository or code outside this presentation. But yeah, so sorry about that. And it's the app, or the would-be app. It's about knitting and yarn inventory or stash, yarn stash inventory. And for those of you who maybe don't recognize the word knitting, it's that handicraft thing, what you can do with needles and yarn. And you can make, for example, socks or sweaters, or, well, to be honest, you can do almost anything with knitting. And I started knitting in about 10 years ago. It was maybe the second year of the university. And I was studying Russian language and culture back then. And our lectures about Russian literature history started, and they were in Russian. And I'm not native Russian speaker, so they were these lectures. They were super interesting, but I found that it's really hard to concentrate because I had to be actively listening in order to understand everything that was said. And it's sometimes hard to concentrate for 1.5 hours when somebody is just talking. And I started doing things like browsing the internet with my phone, or back then I had this actual physical calendar. I was just drawing things there and writing things there. So it was many times I realized that it had been 10 or 15 minutes that I hadn't really listened. And then I decided to try knitting in order to, well, keep my hands occupied while listening. And that actually helped. And I I started learning more and listening the whole time. And since then, I've been knitting actively from, well, about this almost 10 years. And during that time, I've gotten a lot of yarn. Like those of you who love knitting know that like it's easy to buy this beautiful soft yarn, and like it's really like easy to start collecting them, and at some point you just might realize that there is like lots of yarn in your house, and there is not actually space for them anymore. And that's what's happened to me several times, and then I've had to give some yarn away, and that has been hard because I love that yarn. It was awesome. But yeah, I would need an app to like do an inventory on my yarn, all the skeins I have. And okay, there are platforms for that, but because I'm a software developer, of course, I need to build my own version of the yarn inventory. So that's why I chose to use that example here. And because that app actually doesn't exist, I have to say that we will imagine that we have this GraphQL API, which provides all the possible yarn brands and everything related to that. So that, unfortunately, I think that API doesn't even exist, but in this presentation, it does. Yeah, and a little note about code examples I'm using here. They are not actually production ready, so please don't just go and copy these from my presentation and use in production ready app, because, well, there are some things that like need to be considered, and I've made the examples as simple as possible to demonstrate the like how these things work. So I also realized while I was preparing for this presentation that I've been using lots of these things before, but I haven't really gotten into why or how things work. So this was actually the first time that I really read the documentation on Apollo Client on these like features. So I'm really like leaning on the documentation on this presentation. Let's start with reactive variables. They are a way to store data outside the Apollo Client's cache. And you might now wonder why like we would need this thing that's not like that can be used outside the Apollo Client's cache while we are talking about Apollo Client. Well, reactive variables can store data in basically in any type or structure what the Apollo Client's cache cannot. And also reactive variables can be used from anywhere in the app without like the GraphQL syntax. And while they can be used outside the Apollo Client's cache, they can also be used within the inside the cache. So there will be examples about this later. As the name suggests, reactive variables can trigger reactive changes in the application. And this means that whenever you modify the value of a reactive variable, the queries that are somehow dependent on that variable, they refresh, and then like the UI also updates accordingly. So how do we create and read the reactive variables? Apollo Client provides this makeVar function for creating reactive variables. And in our application, we want to get, because like we get the list of different yarns from the API. Then like we want to store the yarns we've selected to somewhere. And for that, we are using the like reactive variables. And here we are defining our selected yarns reactive variable with makeVar and initializing it with empty array. Then when we want to read the value from this reactive variable, selected yarns variable, we call it basically. So like the makeVar, it returns a function basically which can be used for like reading and also modifying, which I will show in the next slide. But as you can see here, if we first initialize the reactive variable with the empty array and then read it, the console log outputs an empty array. For modifying, we would actually just pass the data we want to put into the reactive variable as a parameter. So basically, here's an example where we first initialize the selected yarns reactive variable as an empty array, and then we set its value to an array with one object that has like this information about the yarn. I've actually left the ID parameter from this example to make the code snippet a little shorter, but there would be also the ID field there. And then when we read the value of the selected yarns reactive variable, we can see that, well, it's the same that we put there. So one thing to note here is that if we have, for example, an array, and then we want to put something like add more stuff into that array, then we have to like remember to take the old data and merge it with the new data and then set it into the reactive variable. Then we have field policies. If you've used the Apollo client, like the version 2 point something, I think 2.6 was the latest one before 3.0. But like if you used those versions, there you could define a local property for like on a client side, and then query it with the @client directive. And you like how you would have done it, it would have been with the local resolvers, basically. And in Apollo Client 3, field policies, they are replacing, or they replace the deprecated local resolvers. So they are defined within the type policies, which is another new thing in Apollo Client 3, and I'm not going to be talking about that. So if you're interested, head to the Apollo Clients documentation. So there is more info about that. And basically, when we are defining field policies, we can define the read function, which tells how this value would resolve, and then a merge function, which would tell what to do with the old data and like the new data. There will be an example about that, which hopefully makes it more clear later. What we'll be doing here is we are adding a isSelected field for the yarns, because, well, we have these selected yarns in this reactive variable, but we also want to show in the list that if this particular yarn is selected. So we are defining an isSelected field policy for a yarn. And field policies are defined within type policies, as said, and they are defined when initializing the cache in Apollo Client. And here you can see that we are defining type policies for yarn, which has fields, and under the fields, we are defining the isSelected field. And for it, we are defining the read function. So basically, that read function takes as a first parameter, it takes the parent object, and in this case, it would be yarn. And so here we are basically checking if the selected yarns reactive variable has this particular item, and then if it has, then we are returning true from the for the isSelected field, and if not, then false. And then I said the merge function is another thing, and that I will demonstrate on the next thing when I'm speaking about pagination. And why it's important, or like why did I take this pagination as a one thing here, is that if we are working with for example, offset-based API that offers offset-based pagination, it's possible to actually, in the client side, it's possible to try to query that data from the backend with all these offsets, and we would think that we would get the correct data, but actually we just end up in a situation where the new data overrides the old data. So we are for example, trying to get the items from offset 10, next 10 items from offset 10, and then we are actually overriding the ones that were from 0 to 9, basically. So that's a possible scenario, and that's why I wanted to take this one also, or talk about this one in my presentation. So the way to, or the recommended way to get more data with Apollo Client is the fetch more function, which is actually a member of observable query object from the client watch query. And it's also added a part of the the object that's returned from use query hook when querying things from the backend. So when we are calling it, we can provide when we are calling the fetch more function, we can provide a new set of variables. So for example, like this new offset, so that we want now from the things from offset 10, next 10 items from there. And we could also actually give to the fetch more function, we could give the new query where we would define that actually from this query, we need just these, we don't want all the fields from that initial query. So we could ask for just a couple of fields too. So it would be possible to give a new query to the fetch more function too. And you might wonder if you've used version 2, that what's changed? Well, in Apollo Client's version 2, you had to provide the update query function to define what to do with the new data and how to handle that. But now in the world of Apollo Client 3, the merge function in field policies actually handles that. If we first take a look at the possible server-side schema, so this is on server side in our Yarn API. So basically we have this yarns query there, which takes offset and limit as a parameter, and then returns an array of yarns. We can define merge function, and then we will need this key args too. I will explain about them later. But we can define these things for this yarns query in the front end. So first of all, key args, it actually specifies a list of arguments, if there are any, that can that will cause the cache to store a separate field value for each unique combination of those arguments that are passed to it. So in this case, it would we would pass false there because we actually want to store. So what we want to do is to define a merge in this field policy in order to have all the data in one array, so that we can use it in the front end, so that it's coming from the cache as one array basically, and not as separate entities based on arguments. And key args is the one that specifies these arguments that cause the cache to store these separate field values for each unique combination of those arguments. So in this case, we actually don't want anything to be these arguments, because we want everything combined. That merge function takes the first parameter it takes is the existing data, what there is, and then the second one is incoming data. And then because we want to combine the existing and incoming data, we are returning the an array where we've spreaded everything from the existing data and incoming data, basically. So if we wouldn't do that, incoming data would override the existing data here. And now that we have this field policy in place, Apollo Client knows how to merge these results and from this similar queries, and the app would work as expected. So yeah, thanks. And if you have any questions, please ask them in Slack, in the dev general Tech Weeklies thread. So I will be answering there, and I will also add my slides or link my slides there. And if you want to read more about these things, I suggest you to head to the Apollo Client documentation. There is lots of more cool things there too. Thanks.